I spent my entire childhood being told I didn't belong. My stepmother would stare at me across the dinner table and say just loud enough for my father to hear, "It's strange, isn't it? She looks nothing like you." My sister Alyssa would laugh and whisper to her friends, "She's probably not even really his daughter." For 18 years, I believed them. I believed I was the outsider, the mistake, the one who didn't deserve a place at the table. So when my father died and Alyssa stood up at the will, reading her voice dripping with false concern, and demanded I take a DNA test to prove I deserved any of this, I wasn't surprised. What surprised me was when the lawyer opened the results. The room went silent. Alyssa was smiling, waiting for her victory. Then the lawyer looked up, not at me, but at her, and asked a question that made my sister's face drain of all color. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered. Have you ever discovered that the person pointing fingers was hiding the biggest secret of all? My name is Candace Harper. I'm 36 years old, and I'm the chief financial officer of a successful consulting firm in Chicago. On paper, I have everything a corner office, a six-figure salary, respect from colleagues who know me as Candace Moore. But there's one thing: I've never had a family that wanted me. I found out my father died through an email, not a phone call, not a tearful message from a relative, a formal three-paragraph email from his attorney, Martin Chen, informing me that William Harper had passed away and that my presence was requested at the reading of his will. 18 years. That's how long it had been since I'd spoken to anyone in that house. 18 years since I packed a single suitcase at 17 and walked out the front door, convinced that no one would even notice I was gone. As my rental car pulled up the long driveway, I saw her, Vivian. My stepmother stood at an upstairs window watching my arrival. Most people would expect grief on a widow's face, but Vivian's expression wasn't sorrow, it was anxiety. Her fingers gripped the curtain like she was bracing for impact. That look triggered memories I had spent years trying to bury. I was 8 years old, standing in the living room while Vivian examined our family portrait. She turned to my father and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's so strange that Candace looks nothing like you, William. Not your eyes, not your nose, nothing at all." I remember the way my father's face tightened, the way he said nothing in my defense, the way Alyssa, only 4 years old, then giggled without understanding why. At 15, I wrote my father letters from summer camp. 5 letters, each one a desperate attempt to tell him how lonely I felt, how much I wanted him to see me. He never wrote back, not once. I told myself he was busy. Deep down, I believed he simply didn't care, and at 17, I accidentally walked into his study and found him crying. He was holding a photograph of my mother, my real mother, who died when I was 3. It was the only time I ever saw him show emotion, but when he noticed me standing there, his face shut down like a steel door. "What do you need?" he asked, his voice cold. I mumbled an apology and left. I never understood why he pushed me away when I only wanted to be close. Now, standing in the foyer of my childhood home, those memories pressed against my chest like stones. The house was filled with relatives I barely recognized. They clustered in small groups, speaking in low voices that stopped whenever I walked past. I caught fragments of their whispers, "Only here for the money." Never visited once. Some daughter she turned out to be. Vivian stayed glued to Alyssa's side, the two of them whispering constantly. My sister had grown into a polished, confident woman, everything I apparently was not. When she finally addressed the room, her voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted her place in this family. "Before we read Dad's will," Alyssa announced, "I think we should address the elephant in the room. Candace should take a DNA test to prove she's actually Dad's daughter." The room murmured its approval. I watched Vivian nod eagerly, too eagerly. Something about this felt rehearsed, planned, a trap I was walking into with my eyes wide open, so I did the only thing that made sense. "I'll take the test," I said calmly. "But the will mentions biological children. To be fair, shouldn't all of us claiming inheritance be tested?" Alyssa laughed. "Fine by me. I have nothing to hide." But in that moment, I saw something flash across Vivian's face, just for a second. Something that looked almost like fear. And across the room, my grandmother, Eleanor. My mother's mother, the woman. Vivian had pushed out of our lives decades ago, caught my eye, and gave me the smallest nod, as if to say, "Finally." It's time. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I stayed at the house, sleeping in a guest room that felt more like a holding cell. The DNA results would take a week, and until then, I had nowhere else to go. Part of me wanted to leave immediately to escape the suffocating atmosphere of whispers and pointed looks, but something kept me there. Maybe it was my grandmother's nod. Maybe it was the flicker of fear I had seen on Vivian's face. Or maybe after 18 years of running, I was finally ready to stand my ground. My father's funeral was held on a gray Tuesday morning. Alyssa had taken control of every detail, and she made sure I knew my place. When I arrived at the church, I was directed to a seat in the back row behind distant cousins I had never met. The funeral program was printed on expensive cream paper, listing the Harper family members in elegant script. I found my name at the very bottom in small print under a section labeled Other Relatives. Not daughter, not family, just other. Vivian delivered the eulogy. She stood at the podium in a black designer dress, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief as she spoke about her beloved husband and our devoted daughter Alyssa. She talked about family dinners and holiday traditions, about the life they had built together. She painted a picture of a happy home, a loving marriage, a perfect family. She never once mentioned my name. It was as if I had never existed at all, as if the first 3 years of my father's life as a parent, the years with my mother, the years with me, had simply been erased. I sat in that back row and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not sadness, not even anger. Just a quiet, bitter confirmation of everything I had always suspected. I was never meant to be part of this family. I was just a reminder of someone Vivian wanted everyone to forget. After the service, as the crowd moved toward the reception hall, I felt someone press a piece of paper into my hand. I looked up to see Rosa, the family housekeeper. She had worked for my father for 15 years, and she was one of the few people in that house who had ever shown me kindness. She squeezed my fingers briefly, then walked away without a word. I unfolded the note carefully, shielding it from view. The handwriting was shaky, but clear. Mr. Harper's study, 3rd floor. He wanted you to see it. I have the key. I found Rosa in the kitchen an hour later washing dishes while the reception continued in the other room. She dried her hands and looked at me with tired eyes. Your father kept that room locked for years, she said quietly. He told Mrs. Vivian it was for confidential company documents, that it had a special security system. She tried to find the key many times, but she never could. Your father kept it at Mr. Chen's office in the safe. Rosa paused, and I saw something painful cross her face. After his stroke 8 years ago, your father could not speak properly for a long time. Mrs. Vivian, she controlled everything. Who could visit? What phone calls he could take. She screened his mail, his messages, everything. He was like a prisoner in his own home, and there was nothing any of us could do. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small brass key. Mr. Chen gave this to me after your father passed. He said you should see what is inside, alone. The 3rd floor of the house had always been off limits when I was growing up. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding with each step. The hallway was dim, the air thick with dust and silence. At the end of the corridor, I found the door. It looked ordinary, just another wooden door in a house full of them. But when I turned the key and pushed it open, I stepped into another world. The room was a shrine. That is the only word for it. Every wall was covered with photographs of me. Not the kind of photos you find on social media, but professional surveillance shots taken from a distance. Me walking to work. Me at a conference. Me laughing with colleagues at a restaurant. There were newspaper clippings about my career achievements, printed articles featuring Candace Moore, CFO. He had tracked my entire adult life without me ever knowing. On the desk, I found a thick file folder. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The first document was a DNA test dated 12 years ago. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. The test showed that Alyssa Harper had no biological relationship to William Harper. My sister was not my father's daughter. Below that were medical records from when Alyssa had needed a bone marrow transplant. A note from the doctor explained that William had volunteered to be a donor, but testing revealed he was not a genetic match. That was how he had discovered the truth. There were trust fund documents showing that my father had been sending me money for 10 years through Martin Chen. I remembered that money. I had thought it was a grant for women entrepreneurs. I had applied on a whim and been shocked when I was selected. It had helped me survive my first years in Chicago when I had nothing. It had never been a grant. It had been my father watching over me from the shadows. There were divorce papers signed and finalized 5 years ago. My father had divorced Vivian. But for Alyssa's sake, he had allowed them to continue living in the house. And then in a separate envelope, I found something that made my throat close up completely. Dozens of letters still sealed addressed to William Harper in my own teenage handwriting. The letters I had sent from summer camp. The letters I thought he had ignored. Someone had hidden them from him. He never even knew I had written. But somehow eventually he had found them. In the center of the desk, placed as if waiting for me, was a single letter in my father's handwriting. The script was shaky and uneven, clearly written by a hand weakened by illness. It was dated 2 months before his death. I picked it up and began to read. My beloved Candace, I have failed you in ways I can never fully explain. When your mother died, I was broken. Vivian appeared, and I was too weak to see what she really was. By the time I understood, it was too late. 12 years ago, I discovered that Alyssa is not my biological daughter. Vivian had been pregnant by another man when we met. She lied to me for 20 years. I wanted to tell you immediately. I wanted to bring you home. But then I had the stroke, and Vivian took control of everything. I could not speak. I could not write. I could not reach you. By the time I recovered enough to act, I was afraid you would reject me, that I had lost you forever. So I did what I could. I watched over you from a distance. I sent you money through Martin. I collected every piece of your life I could find. I kept your letters, the ones Vivian hid from me, and I read them every night, hating myself for my silence. The will is my last act, my only way to give you what you deserve. I am sorry I was never brave enough to fight for you when I could. I hope this can be enough. Your father who loved you always. The letter ended mid-sentence. He died before he could finish. I was still holding the paper tears streaming down my face when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I grabbed the most important documents and turned just as the door swung open. Alyssa stood in the doorway, her face pale. Her eyes moved from my face to the papers in my hands, and I watched the color drain from her cheeks. What, she whispered, is that? For the first time in 18 years, I saw genuine fear in my sister's eyes. Fear of something she did not even understand yet. I did not answer Alyssa's question that night. I simply gathered the documents, walked past her frozen figure, and locked myself in my room. She did not follow me. She did not demand an explanation. Perhaps some part of her already sensed that the truth would destroy everything she believed about herself. The next 3 days passed in heavy silence. Alyssa avoided me completely. Vivian watched me with barely concealed panic, trying to gauge how much I knew, and I waited, saying nothing, holding my cards close until the moment they would matter most. The will reading was scheduled for Friday morning at Martin Chen's office downtown. The room was small but elegant with leather chairs, arranged in a semicircle facing Martin's oak desk. Vivian arrived first, dressed in black, as if still performing the role of grieving widow. She positioned herself in the center chair, shoulders back, chin high. Alyssa sat beside her, but I noticed she had moved her chair slightly away from her mother. My grandmother Eleanor took a seat in the back corner, quiet and watchful. I chose a chair on the opposite side of the room from Vivian, the folder from my father's study resting in my lap. Martin began by explaining the legal framework of the will. He spoke in a calm, measured voice, but I could see him glancing at Vivian as he read the key passage. Mr. Harper added a special clause to his will 2 years before his death, Martin said. It reads as follows. My estate shall be distributed solely to my biological children. All parties claiming inheritance must consent to DNA verification. Anyone who refuses testing forfeits their claim. DNA samples for comparison have been preserved with my attorney. I watched Vivian's face as Martin spoke those last words. Preserved samples. For a moment, her confident mask slipped. Her eyes widened just slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to object, but could not find the words. She had not expected this. She had assumed that with my father dead, there would be no way to verify anything. She had built her entire plan on that assumption, and now she realized perhaps for the first time that my father had anticipated her. Martin continued, as both Miss Candace and Miss Alyssa consented to DNA testing, and as Mr. Harper provided his own DNA sample before his passing, we now have conclusive results from the laboratory. He picked up a sealed envelope from his desk. The room went completely silent. I could hear Vivian's shallow breathing, could see Alyssa gripping the arms of her chair. Martin opened the envelope with a letter opener, unfolded the document inside, and began to read. Candace Harper confirmed 99.99% biological match to William Harper. I exhaled slowly. Beside me, I heard Vivian let out a small breath of her own. She was still hoping, still believing that somehow this would go her way. Martin was not finished. Alyssa Harper. He continued, his voice steady. Zero biological relationship to William Harper detected. No genetic markers in common. The room erupted. Alyssa leaped to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. That is impossible, she shouted. There has been a mistake. The lab made an error. Run it again. She spun toward Vivian, her face twisted with desperation. Mom, tell them they are wrong. Tell them. But Vivian did not move. She sat frozen in her chair, her mind clearly racing, searching for an escape route that did not exist. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Vivian recovered. She stood, her voice sharp and commanding. This is obviously a conspiracy, she declared. Martin Chen has always favored Candace. Everyone knows that. He probably tampered with the results himself. I had been waiting for this moment. I opened the folder in my lap and pulled out the DNA test I had found in my father's study. Then explain this, I said calmly. I held up the document so everyone in the room could see it. This is a DNA test from 12 years ago. My father already knew the truth. He found out when Alyssa needed a bone marrow transplant, and he volunteered to be a donor. The doctors told him he was not a genetic match. That is when he ordered this test. I looked directly at Vivian. 12 years. He knew for 12 years that Alyssa was not his daughter. Vivian pivoted without missing a beat. That proves nothing, she snapped. He accepted Alyssa as his daughter anyway. He raised her. He loved her. Legally, she is still entitled to... Martin interrupted, his voice cutting through her protests like a blade. Mrs. Harper, or should I say Ms. Vivian Shaw, since your divorce from William was finalized 5 years ago. Vivian's face went pale. You have no legal standing in this room, and Alyssa's claim to the estate depends entirely on biological relationship per the explicit terms of the will. Vivian turned to Alyssa, her voice suddenly pleading. Don't you see what they are doing? They are trying to steal your inheritance, your birthright. We need to fight this together. We can hire lawyers. We can contest the will. We can... You knew. Alyssa's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through Vivian's desperate monologue like a knife. She was staring at her mother with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not sadness. Something closer to horror. You knew I was not his daughter, Alyssa said slowly. You have always known. Vivian's mask cracked. Alyssa, sweetheart, I was protecting you. Everything I did was to protect you. You have to understand. Protecting me. Alyssa's voice rose, trembling with rage and pain. You spent my entire childhood telling me that Candace was probably illegitimate. You made me treat her like garbage. You convinced me that I was the real daughter and she was the imposter. And the whole time... Her voice broke. She pressed her hand to her mouth, struggling to breathe. The whole time it was me. I was the one who did not belong. She turned to me, her eyes wet with tears. Did you know before today? I held up the file from my father's room. I found out 2 days ago. Dad knew for 12 years. He never told anyone except Martin. He loved you despite everything, Alyssa. That is why he stayed silent. He could not bear to hurt you. I paused, then looked at Vivian. But your mother, she knew from the very beginning, from before you were even born. Martin cleared his throat. Mr. Harper left a letter to be read at this time. He picked up the final document from his desk and began to read my father's words aloud. The letter explained everything. How Vivian had deceived him when they first met, how he had discovered the truth 12 years ago. How his stroke had left him helpless, trapped in his own home, while Vivian controlled every aspect of his life. How he had watched over me from a distance, sending money through Martin, collecting every piece of my life he could find. How the will was his last act, his only way to make things right. When Martin finished reading, the room was silent. Vivian stood alone in the center of the room, abandoned by everyone. Alyssa sank back into her chair, staring at nothing. She did not look at her mother, did not look at me. She simply sat there, hollow and broken. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered to no one. And for the first time since childhood, I looked at my sister and felt something I never expected. Not triumph, not vindication, just the hollow ache of recognizing another broken person. The weeks that followed the will reading were filled with paperwork, legal meetings, and the slow unraveling of everything Vivian had built. Martin walked me through the full scope of her downfall during one of our sessions at his office. The prenuptial agreement she had signed 32 years ago left her with nothing in the event of divorce. She had agreed to those terms eagerly, back then confident that she would never need to worry about such things. But my father had also discovered something else during those final years. Vivian had been embezzling money from household accounts for over a decade, siphoning funds into private accounts she thought no one knew about. When my father found out, it nullified any claim she might have had to marital assets. The divorce had been finalized 5 years ago, but my father kept it quiet. He did not want to humiliate Alyssa publicly. Even after everything, he still tried to protect the daughter who was not his. Vivian came to collect her belongings on a Tuesday afternoon. I was waiting in the living room when she arrived. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. The confident woman who had controlled this household for 3 decades was gone, replaced by someone desperate and grasping. She tried one last time to manipulate me. "Candace, please," she said, her voice soft and pleading. "I made mistakes. I know that. But I was just trying to protect my daughter. Surely you can understand a mother's love. Surely you can find it in your heart to—" I cut her off. "You spent 30 years systematically destroying my relationship with my father. You hid my letters so he would think I had forgotten him. You poisoned my sister against me so I would have no ally in this house. You isolated my father after his stroke and controlled him like a prisoner. And you let me believe I was unwanted for my entire childhood." I paused, letting the words settle between us. "The only reason I am not pursuing criminal charges for financial fraud is because my father apparently did not want that. But you have 48 hours to remove yourself from this property. I have nothing else to say to you." Vivian stared at me for a long moment. I think she was waiting for me to waver to show some crack in my resolve that she could exploit. But I had spent 18 years building walls that she could not penetrate. She left without another word. I learned later that the relatives who had once supported her now refused her calls. She had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The woman who had orchestrated everything was now completely alone. Alyssa returned a few days later to collect her things. She was a different person from the confident, mocking sister I had known my whole life. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something fragile and lost. She moved through the house like a ghost, packing boxes with mechanical efficiency. I was in the kitchen when she finally confronted me. "This is your fault," she snapped, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "If you had just stayed away, none of this would have happened. Everything would have been fine." "If I had stayed away," I responded quietly, "you would have inherited everything based on a lie, and you would have spent your whole life not knowing who you really are." "Who am I then?" Alyssa exploded. "My mother is a liar. My father is not my father. I have no idea who my biological father even is. She will not tell me, or maybe she does not even know. Everything I believed about myself was built on lies." She was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "I spent my whole life thinking I was special, thinking I was the real daughter and you were the outsider. And now I find out that I am nobody. I am nothing. I do not even have a name that belongs to me." I let her rage. I did not fight back. I did not try to comfort her. I simply stood there and let her pour out all the pain and confusion that had been building since the will reading. When she finally exhausted herself, slumping against the kitchen counter with her head in her hands, I spoke. "I cannot answer those questions for you. I cannot fix what your mother broke, and I am not going to pretend I have forgiven you for how you treated me our whole lives." I paused, choosing my next words carefully, "but I will tell you this. I know what it is like to grow up feeling like you do not belong. I know what it is like to have your identity stolen by someone else's lies. That part, Alyssa, that part I understand." She stared at me for a long moment, her eyes red and swollen. Then she asked quietly, "What happens to me now?" "Legally, I am required to give you 30 days to vacate. Beyond that, your life is your own to figure out." A few days later, I received a call from a cousin and an aunt who had been at the funeral. They were the same relatives who had whispered about me being a gold digger, who had treated me like an outsider at my own father's memorial. Now they wanted to meet. They claimed they did not know the full story. They wanted to rebuild the relationship to start fresh. I declined. You chose your side without knowing any facts, I told them over the phone. You treated me like a criminal at my own father's funeral. I am not interested in relationships with people whose loyalty depends on who holds the inheritance. I did not slam the phone down. I did not yell. I simply refused and ended the call. Forgiveness is not a participation trophy. It has to be earned, and they had not even begun to try. My grandmother Eleanor asked to meet me at a small cafe downtown, neutral ground. I had barely spoken to her since I was a child, but seeing her at the will reading had stirred something in me. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were the same, kind and sad and full of memories. Your mother was my only child, she said, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. When she died, I tried to stay close to you. But Vivian made it impossible. She told William I was a bad influence, that I was trying to turn you against her. Gradually, I was pushed out. By the time you left at 18, I had lost contact with both of you. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple gold band with a small diamond. This was your mother's wedding ring, Eleanor said. She wanted you to have it when you were ready. I have been carrying it for 30 years, waiting for the right moment. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. And for the first time since my mother's death, I felt connected to her. Later that week, I asked Martin if there was any legal way to give Alyssa a portion of the estate. He shook his head. Your father specifically anticipated you might ask this. He left a separate note. Martin read from the document, I know your heart, Candace. You will want to share, but Alyssa has spent her entire life being handed things she did not earn. The greatest gift I can give her is the chance to build something herself. Please honor my final wish. I accepted my father's decision, not because I was heartless, but because I understood. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. On her last day in the house, Alyssa paused at the front door with her suitcase. She did not ask for forgiveness, did not apologize again. She simply said, I do not know if I can ever become someone worth knowing, but for what it is worth, I am going to try to find out who I actually am, without the lies. I nodded once, said nothing, watched my sister walk away, no longer an enemy, not yet anything else, just a stranger with a shared wound. 6 months passed. In that time, I made decisions that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The first was selling the family mansion. I could not live there. Every room held too many ghosts, too many memories of feeling unwanted in my own home. The hallways echoed with the whispers of relatives who had judged me, the cold silences of a father who could not reach me, the cruel laughter of a sister who had been taught to despise me. I signed the papers without hesitation and never looked back. But my father had left me something else, something Vivian never knew about. Years ago, he had purchased a small cottage on the coast, registered under Martin's name for privacy. It was a simple place, weathered shingles, and a wraparound porch that faced the Pacific Ocean. The first time I walked through the door, I understood why he had bought it. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was far away from everything that had hurt us both. I made it my own. I hung photos on the walls, creating a history that belonged to me. Pictures of my mother, young and smiling, her dark hair blowing in the wind. Pictures of my grandmother, Eleanor, who had waited 30 years to give me back a piece of my past. And pictures of my father from before the stroke, from before Vivian, from a time when his eyes still held light. I found one photograph that made me stop breathing for a moment. It was my father holding me as a baby, both of us smiling at the camera. His eyes were filled with pure, uncomplicated love. I framed it and placed it on my nightstand. Every morning when I wake up, it is the first thing I see. I continued my work as CFO, but I no longer hid who I was. For years, I had used my mother's maiden name professionally, separating myself from the Harper legacy. Now I claimed both. My company biography reads Candace Harper Moore, both names, both parts of myself. I am my mother's daughter and my father's daughter, and I no longer need to choose between them. The inheritance was substantial, more than I could ever spend in one lifetime. I knew immediately what I wanted to do with it. I established the William Harper Foundation, named not to honor my father's memory, but to transform his failures into something meaningful. The Foundation's mission is simple: supporting children from fractured families, children who grew up doubted, children who were dismissed, children who were made to feel like they did not belong. The Foundation's homepage features the last words my father ever wrote to me. You never needed to prove you deserved to be loved. You only needed to prove it to yourself. Scholarship recipients are not selected by academic achievement alone. We ask applicants to write essays describing their experiences of feeling like outsiders in their own families. The first class included 30 students. I read every single application personally. Their stories broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. So many children growing up the way I did. So many young people believing they were unwanted, unworthy, unloved. If I can help even a few of them understand their own value, then something good will have come from all those years of pain. Rosa keeps me updated on everything. She calls once a month, her voice warm and familiar, a connection to a past that was not entirely dark. Martin provides information too, though his updates are more formal. Through them, I learned what happened to everyone. Vivian moved to another state to live with a distant cousin who barely tolerates her presence. She has become a social pariah in her old circles. The women who once envied her, who attended her parties and complimented her taste, now refuse to acknowledge her existence. She tried to contact Alyssa multiple times after leaving. Alyssa blocked her number. No one has heard Vivian mention the Harper family in months. She has been erased from the life she spent 30 years building, just as she once tried to erase me. Alyssa moved to a small town in Oregon. She works at a local nonprofit, an entry-level position with minimum wage. She uses her middle name, now Grace, as if trying to become a completely different person. Rosa heard through a mutual acquaintance that she is in therapy working through decades of manipulation and lies. She is also trying to find her biological father, but Vivian refuses to reveal his identity. Perhaps she genuinely does not know. Perhaps it is her final act of control over a daughter who no longer speaks to her. 3 months after leaving the house, Alyssa sent me a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, her handwriting careful and uncertain on the envelope. I opened it slowly, not knowing what to expect. I am not writing to ask for anything. The letter began. I just wanted you to know that I am trying. I am learning how to be a person without the lies I was raised on. I do not expect you to write back. I do not expect forgiveness. I just thought you deserved to know that your words mattered. What you said about knowing what it feels like to have your identity stolen, I am trying to build a new one. Whether I succeed or not, that is on me now. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. I did not respond. Not yet. But I did not throw it away either. Some wounds need more than 6 months to heal. Some doors should stay closed until both people are ready to walk through them. Maybe someday I will write back. Maybe someday we will find a way to be something other than strangers. But that day is not today, and I have made peace with that. This evening, I am sitting on my cottage porch, watching the sunset over the Pacific. The sky is painted in shades of orange and pink and gold colors, so beautiful they almost hurt to look at. My mother's ring glints on my finger, catching the fading light. In my lap sits my father's unfinished letter, the pages soft and worn, from how many times I have read them. I read the last paragraph one more time, his shaking handwriting blurring slightly through my tears. You spent your whole life thinking you had to prove you belonged. But the truth is, you were always my daughter. The only thing you ever needed to prove was to yourself that you were worthy of your own love. I hope someday you believe that. I fold the letter gently and hold it against my chest. The ocean waves crash against the shore below, steady and eternal. The wind carries the scent of salt and pine. And finally, after 18 years of silence, I speak the words I have been carrying all this time. I do, Dad. I finally do. I stand slowly, taking one last look at the horizon where the sun is slipping beneath the water. Then I walk inside my home. My home. Not the house where I grew up feeling unwanted. Not the mansion filled with painful memories. This small cottage by the sea, filled with photos of people who loved me, is where I belong. I close the door softly behind me. Through the window, I can see my mother's ring catching the last light of the setting sun. For 18 years, I thought I was the lie in that family, but I was the only truth they had. And now, finally, I am free to live like it. Thank you for listening to Candace's story all the way to the end. Before you go, I want to share some thoughts about what we can learn from her journey. Family is supposed to be our safe place, but sometimes the people closest to us cause the deepest wounds. Candace spent 18 years believing she was unwanted, not because it was true, but because someone deliberately made her feel that way. Vivian's manipulation worked for so long because no one questioned it. No one stood up to say that something was wrong. If you recognize yourself in Candace's story, I want you to know this. The way people treat you says everything about who they are and nothing about your worth. You do not need to prove you deserve love. You do not need to earn your place in your own family. Anyone who makes you feel like an outsider in your own home is the one with the problem, not you. And if you see yourself in Alyssa's story, remember that it is never too late to question the lies you were raised on. It takes courage to look honestly at your own behavior and ask yourself if you have been treating someone unfairly. Growth is always possible, but only if you are willing to do the hard work. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. Secrets built on lies will always crumble. Vivian spent 30 years constructing a false reality, and in the end, she lost everything. The inheritance she schemed for, the daughter she manipulated, the reputation she valued. All of it gone, because the truth cannot be buried forever. I hope this story reminded you that your identity is not defined by what others say about you. You get to decide who you are and who you become. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another video. We share new stories every week about real people overcoming extraordinary challenges, and I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to fight to prove your worth to people who should have loved you unconditionally? Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything? Share your experience with our community. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you again for being here. Take care of yourselves, and remember you are worthy of love exactly as you are.
It's truly an emotional bombshell, a toxic family type of drama that anyone who's ever been betrayed by a relative will nod in agreement with. As someone who witnessed real-life inheritance drama, my friend lost half his fortune because his sisters played dirty tricks on him. After watching it, I was both furious on Candace's behalf and felt a sense of satisfaction, like karma didn't sleep. The story isn't just dramatic with a DNA twist, but it also delves into the pain of not belonging, yet ends with personal healing, something I respect because real life rarely has such sweet revenge as in movies. I'll share my honest thoughts, analyze each key plot point based on the video content, and draw lessons learned, the kind of harsh reality analysis I often do, because stories like this usually leave lasting scars rather than fleeting joy. Truly, this story touches on a core pain, the feeling of being excluded from family from a young age, being turned into an outsider so they can feel safe. Candace isn't the crying victim demanding justice, but rather a resilient person, silently gathering the truth. And that's what I admire, because it's realistic. Sometimes, responding with evidence is stronger than shouting. Twist DNA made me chuckle. Alyssa dug her own grave. But the profound part is Candace's journey from outsider to a free person, needing no one to validate her worth. After watching it, I felt a warm feeling of, finally, I deserve it, but also a warning. Toxic families can destroy a person's life if boundaries aren't set early. Overall, it's like a concise form of psychological therapy. Pain at the beginning, healing at the end. The story is told through a mix of flashbacks and present-day events, building like a ticking time bomb, from simmering suspicion to the explosion of truth. I've analyzed it using a classic structure for easy viewing, focusing on key plot points from the video. Introduction, a background of isolation, and an unexpected invitation, from childhood to a will email. Main plot: Candace, 36, a Chicago CFO, using her mother's professional name, grew up with her stepmother Vivian hinting that she wasn't William's biological daughter. Things like, she doesn't look like him at all, at dinner. Her sister Alyssa whispered to friends that Candace was an outsider. Candace internalized this for 18 years, considering herself a mistake, leaving home at 17 with only a suitcase and never returning. When William died, she received an official email from lawyer Martin Chun inviting her to read his will. Flashback, unanswered letters to her father, a rare moment of him crying beside a picture of her mother, then him coldly pushing her away. Analysis: this plot point perfectly builds internal conflict. Candace is a willing outsider, but the wounds from the toxic words still bleed. The humor lies in the contrast. She's independent and successful, yet her family still sees her as a money grabber. Personally, I find it reflects reality. Childhood whispers are more destructive than shouting, and Candace's decision to leave is her first heroic act. Silence isn't weakness, it's self-preservation. Development: returning and uncovering the secret at the old house before reading the will. Main plot: back home. Candace sees Vivian looking anxiously from the window, relatives whispering about the absent one who wants money. At the will announcement, Alyssa demands DNA tests for everyone for fairness. Vivian nods eagerly, and her grandmother Eleanor nods encouragingly. Candace calmly agrees, in a living room amidst the tense atmosphere. At the funeral, Vivian reads the obituary, erasing Candace's name, only listing her as another relative. The maid, Rosa, secretly slips a note. Mr. Harper's study, 3rd floor. He wants you to see it. Rosa reveals Vivian controlled William after the stroke, giving him the key. In the locked room, Candace searches for the shrine. Photos tracking her career, newspaper clippings, old DNA. Alyssa is not William's daughter, discovered during a bone marrow transplant 12 years prior. A hidden fund with anonymous deposits. She thought it was a scholarship. Secret divorce papers with Vivian from 5 years ago to protect Alyssa. Hidden teenage letters. In William's last letter apologizing for his failures after his mother's death, explaining that Vivian lied about. Alyssa's origins, that the stroke rendered him impotent and that he protected her from afar. Alyssa interrupts, her face pale, but Candace silently locks the door. 3 days of silence follow. Vivian is distraught, and Alyssa avoids her. Analysis: this is the most tense part, with layers of secrets piling up like buried treasure. The small twist in the classroom, from suspicion to confirmation, surprised me, as it plays on the parents know everything but are powerless motif. It's a kind of reality. In a toxic family, the outsider is often the only one who can save themselves, like Candace crying alone, but not breaking down. I like the detail of William's letter, as it adds emotional depth, reminding me that fatherly love can endure over distance. Climax: reading the will, and the truth explodes at Martin's office. Main plot: will clause. Property only to biological children. DNA must be from a preserved sample. Vivian is visibly shocked. Results: Candace matches William 99.9%, Alyssa 0%. Alyssa explodes, demanding a re-examination, accusing of errors, and begging Vivian, blaming her for a conspiracy with Martin. Candace presents old DNA, revealing William's knowledge of the matter for 12 years. Martin reveals his divorce from Vivian and her embezzlement, invalidating her claim. Alyssa confronts Vivian. Mother, you know I'm not your child. You spent your whole life telling Candace she was illegitimate. Alyssa collapses, realizing she is the outsider. Martin reads William's letter, details of deception, a stroke like imprisonment, paternal love. Vivian isolates herself. Alyssa whispers, I don't know who I am anymore. Analysis twist: DNA is the climax. It's not Candace who wins, but Alyssa who realizes she's been deceived, creating unexpected empathy. The dark humor comes from Vivian's mask falling off, and Alyssa's pleas, a kind of you reap what you sow situation. Personally, I find this part similar to a family crime film. The evidence, DNA, letters, is the weapon, and Candace wins because she doesn't act emotionally. It builds a chaotic climax from despair, Alyssa turning pale, to exposure, confrontation, highlighting how toxic words can backfire like a boomerang. Conclusion: aftermath and healing, weeks to 6 months later. Main plot: Martin explains Vivian's bankruptcy. The marriage contract left her penniless, and embezzlement was exposed. Vivian pleads with Candace for maternal love, but Candace lists the manipulations: hiding letters, poisoning Alyssa, isolating William. and gives her 48 hours to leave. Relatives shun Vivian, and she moves to another province, becoming an outcast. Alyssa returns, reproaches Candace, and becomes enraged about her lost identity and her biological father. Vivian doesn't reveal his identity. Candace sympathizes but doesn't forgive, telling Alyssa to find him herself. Her grandmother, Eleanor, apologizes for being pushed aside by Vivian and gives her Candace's mother's wedding ring. Candace refuses to reconcile the relatives due to disloyalty and doesn't share Alyssa's assets, as William wishes, to avoid an unworthy gift. Alyssa leaves, saying she will find her true self. Candace sells the haunted mansion and uses the seaside cottage William bought to acquire his secret. 6 months later, using her full name, Candace Harper Moore, a photo frame of her and her father, she established the William Harper Foundation to support children from broken families, using an essay about feeling marginalized. Vivian isolated herself from distant relatives. Alyssa, in Oregon, worked low-paying jobs, underwent therapy, used the middle name Grace, and searched for her father. Alyssa sent letters striving to build a life without lies, which Candace kept but did not reply to. She sat on the porch of her cottage, reading William's unfinished letter. I spend my life proving I belong. Just prove to myself that I deserve self-love. She affirmed her belonging, closing the door to her home by the sea. Analysis: the ending isn't sentimental, no reunion, but personal liberation. It's subtly humorous in Vivian's plea, after years of manipulation, but profound in the charity fund, transforming pain into help. I find it powerful because Candace chooses a boundary, not responding to Alyssa's letter, reflecting reality. Healing comes from within, not from the perpetrator. From this drama, I've learned a few practical lessons for my family and myself, the kind that can be applied to avoid repeating past mistakes, because I believe family secrets often explode too late. Harmful words in childhood are a time bomb. Set boundaries early to protect yourself. Vivian and Alyssa use subtle hints to control Candace, turning her into an outsider. The lesson: if your family makes you doubt your worth, leave like Candace and use evidence like a locked room to validate yourself. Don't wait for their acknowledgement. The truth will always come to light, but don't wait for it to define you. DNA reversed, but Candace had already built her own life beforehand. The lesson: don't let others prove you worthy, like Alyssa demanding a test. Build inner self-esteem. As William advises, self-love is your greatest legacy. Family manipulation often stems from fear, empathy, but not blind forgiveness. Alyssa is a victim of Vivian, but she remains toxic to Candace. The lesson: recognize the hierarchy, like her grandmother Eleanor, but keep your distance from the perpetrator. Healing like Alyssa, therapy, finding the root cause, is good, but you don't owe them forgiveness. Prioritize your own well-being. Turning pain into a legacy. Helping others to heal themselves. Candace established a fund from an off-the-cuff essay, turning inheritance into a mission. The lesson: assets are just material things. Use them to support broken children, as she did. And remember, close the door on the past, selling the house, the picture frames, to open the door to the future. In short, this video serves as a stark reminder. Family isn't always home, but truth and self-love will be. If you've ever experienced this kind of DNA drama, or just toxic whispers, tell me, was your twist as pale as Alyssa's? Which part resonated with you the most?